now we have everybody with us. The two main things that we wanted to focus on in this study session is discussing some board norms as a response to our board training that we had just, I guess it would have been last month. But nonetheless, there was some suggested board norms that came out of that discussion, along with some board norms that have kind of filtered their way to Brian and me over this last year that we wanted to capture, and thank you, Ashley, for reminding us about that. But nonetheless, we have a list of 12 kind of previously suggested board norms that we wanted to go over, and I think folks could kind of talk about the ones that they've suggested, why they think they're important, and then that can, of course, continue our conversation about how we do this. My goal is to have the board policy and handbook committee review these, not necessarily to capture all of them in writing in our handbook or in our policies, but just to make sure that they are in line with our current legal standards and current board policies. There might be things that we discuss or want to adopt that would require handbook or policy changes, so we just want to make sure that we're doing that the right way. And it also gives board legal counsel a chance to kind of have their eyes on this as well, or excuse me, district legal counsel have their eyes on these suggestions as well. And then there's also the opportunity for us to raise and bring up new board norms. The second piece to the discussion is just a very quick timeline for our board evaluation that I have typed up on little slips. Alan cut them for me, that's why they're so even. But nonetheless, we do have that, and I wanted to share that with you as well. So let's dive into some norms. As you see, you have a list of 12, and some of these obviously came from our last discussion, like I mentioned. Does somebody who brought this particular number 1 up want to kind of speak to it first?
I think that was me.
Okay.
Basically, I mean, what it says is if we have things go to action, I would request that they are separate motions, not a bulk motion, to save time, because where maybe we have times where we're going to approve them unanimously, but they're, like, more often than not are items that need to be addressed on one particular, at any given time. So a rushed motion that bulks sends them through kind of eliminates that ability to address things individually.
So, like, as I'm hearing you and as I read this first piece that you brought to us, you would prefer if there's 3 items on, say, the action agenda that we've moved, that we would go through them individually and not just say, I motion to approve items 1 through 3 in one motion is kind of what you're
Correct. And I was reviewing the handbook, and it actually says that that's how we're supposed to be functioning as well. So I would say that we stay the course on that concept if we're going to give each item the due attention that it should get.
Perfect. Ashley?
My concern is that that doesn't follow parliamentary procedure. If we get into a norm where we're telling people they can't follow parliamentary procedure, the procedure would be, if you don't want to vote on it that way, you vote no on a person's motion. And once we get into telling people they can't make motions within procedure, we get into a confusing place because we've agreed to follow those procedures. It would be different to say, someone has a preference for that, or letting people know what their preference is. But ultimately, you get to vote no on that if you don't like it. And we would get into a confusing place if we choose to say we're going to follow Robert's Rules of Order except when we don't do that. And it makes it challenging to structure a meeting.
Just for the conversation to the board and to you and Amanda and Ashley, it seems like there might be an incongruence with Robert's Rules of Order of Parliamentary Procedure and what we have outlined in the handbook. And that might be something that we want to iron out, because I think both points are valid. And so it just seems like there is an incongruence there.
Where is that in the handbook, do you know?
In the process section, if I remember right, probably.
Conducting So 11, maybe?
So other than the consent agenda, each motion should be limited to one idea or issue.
Oh, yeah, number 3.
Number 3.
As a point of order, it is one idea or issue to approve items on action. That's not different. Like, that, once things are on the action agenda, they are an action item. We can take action on any and all items. It's two different things. It just means two different things.
It could be, but I just think it's bad practice to do bulk motions for speed. So if we're looking at board norms, like trying to figure out how to ensure that we are not rushing things to eliminate the ability to properly address any particular topic. Because a lot of times we end up on the action agenda where the more in-depth discussion occurs. So if motions are moving too fast for that to happen, we're not given that opportunity to pay heed to that. And yeah, you can vote no, but if the majority of people, I just think it's bad practice, so, and Robert's Rules of Orders, like, one of the things I've pointed out before is it's meant to be kind of a guideline, not stick strictly to it, to help meetings function efficiently, so, people can decide what they want. That's my preference, because it's frustrating to have that happen.
Made things a little messy with Jurassic Parliament, as kind of our guiding meeting structure. But nonetheless, I think this is another good topic that the Policy and Handbook Committee could take on and see if we can't come up with a recommendation that settles the incongruence and kind of where we're at with the spirit of this. So thank you for the conversation. Number 2.
Okay, so Nate, you're just saying that the policy committee is going to look at this and just see if there's a way that we can accommodate both of these? Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'd
Make a
like
decision.
to
Yeah.
say.
A recommendation, right?
Yeah, make a recommendation that would accommodate both of these concerns.
I think so, yes.
Okay.
Item number 2, if an item has zero intention or need for an action, put it on the report agenda, not discussion. This could also play into Ashley's request that there is a minimum amount of discussion before actions are made, meaning maybe the outcome of the discussion from the report leads to a need for an action, so that would move the next meeting's discussion agenda for the next round of discussions and potential action.
That was me
That was you
again.
again? Okay, dive into it, Amanda.
I mean, it seems like it's pretty clear that some of the board meetings, we've had stuff on the discussion agenda that they're saying no actions needed, which is confusing, because why, like, if I'm looking at this and I'm getting the discussion agenda, I'm expecting that we need to be ready to make a decision. And then we're in this, but we're not seeking a motion. So that's confusing in itself. And then, so just put it as a report. And then it would kind of drive that dialogue a little clearer and cleaner, because just simply by how it's being placed on the agenda, it clearly lays out that this is purely a discussion item, well, through the report, where when it's on the discussion agenda, it's meant to potentially have an action occur. Does that make sense? And so that placement needs to represent what we're doing, I guess.
My question is for Alan or Liz.
I just want to comment. So I think what happens sometimes is there's not a need for the board to vote on it in that particular meeting, but if the board felt they had all the information, were comfortable, they could move it forward, and we probably need to be more clear in our cover memo, basically stating that there, this doesn't need to be approved at this meeting. However, if the board feels they have all the information and want to move it to action, they can. And because if it's on report, then we can't move it to action. But if it's on discussion, there's probably been stuff that gets put on the discussion agenda. We don't anticipate the board approving it today, but we're going to put it on the discussion just in case they want to move forward with it. And we would need to be very clear in our cover memo that that's the case.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be helpful, that that is possible outcome if the board is seeking it, because I think that part of the thing that the board kind of gets stumped in these meetings is to, well, what are we doing next? If we're not expected to do a motion on a discussion agenda item, then we're sitting here waiting for, what are we doing then? So if that messaging isn't clear, that it's either chew on the information, ask the questions, or make a motion if you're comfortable making a motion.
We have tried to say when we've needed a motion, but I think on some, like tonight is a good example, because we have on there the, shoot, I always forget the name of the pathway, the focused graduation pathway in the discussion, which
The
is.
honors diploma?
No, the other one, the focused discussion pathway, it's under discussion. And it's the first reading of that, so it's the first reading, and there doesn't need to be an approval tonight, except there could be, because what we're doing is just following state law and getting caught up with state law, and so proposing to you something like that. So that's a good example of one that could go either way.
True, but like if we're gonna do what Ashley's brought up in the past, which I think is valid, is giving, especially new topics, opportunity for quality discussion before jumping to decisions, that that's allowing a hasty decision, for lack of better words. So if we're going to look at how much are we talking about it before we move it to an action, then that would be a way to help ensure the conversation's happening before a, roughly speaking, a rush decision is made. So, again, going back to placing it where it makes more sense, I guess, from my perspective.
We kind of have, just to skip to number 4, we'll get back to number 3 for sure, but that kind of outlines some of what I think you and Ashley might be talking about, is what's our structure for when items are brought to us, how often do we visit them before we actually make that decision? Ashley, did you want to weigh in on that?
I just think there, for many items, there are typical schedules of first reading, second reading, final reading, and we have fallen out of that. This doesn't require, in my opinion, a long conversation. Every other board does this. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to reaffirm what that used to be, which is what items are read a given number of times and stating that in the meeting when it's being led.
So are you proposing what that quantity is?
I think that quantity for many committees and items exists. Like a policy is typically read 3 times. Different actions that follow our policy guidelines, like G5 would be one, right? Like we have norms for what that is. We just need to follow what those norms are and have been.
So if I'm hearing Ashley, it's just kind of a reintroduction of the norms of the norm. Is that?
That there's not one answer, because over time, as an institution, there are existing answers. And we just have fallen out of the habit of saying, this is the first reading of this policy. At the June whatever date meeting, we will have the second reading of that policy, and we anticipate action in July. Thank you so much. And actually stating explicitly what it is, but usually that is driven from committee work. Like that's why the committees do what they do. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I was just kind of thinking procedurally wise, if we've fallen out of it, does that need to be like guidance written in? Obviously not black and white, it has to be done. Like the recommendation is, so allows the leniency for, so that it's less likely to fall out of practice.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the standard is 3 times, but the reason why I don't want to put in ink that that's the standard is obviously the reason you don't write down a norm like that is because sometimes you have to take action on something before you've read it 3 times for an emergency, or specific policies have different rules that require like a public comment that other things do not. But the baseline is 3, and things go up or down from there based on the situation. And we just have fallen out of announcing where we are in the 3. Like it's not new, that's just.
Well, and you guys know better than I do, and that's where, like, if it were put in writing, you put in stuff like recommended that average of 3 readings, and then it gives that flexibility, but then that general guidance is there. I was just, like, if you go by memory, that's where we get in problems.
I think that's something that we can get back to pretty easily.
Too, from what I'm hearing, if an item isn't going to be read for the standard 3 times, that is a specific in the presentation, because of reason X, Y, and Z, we are requesting that the board approve this on reading 1. You know, in the legislature, you often hear suspension of the rules. I don't know if we want to get like that, but. But just so that the audience knows there's a reason why we're not going to do this 3 times.
One of the challenges with reading it 3 rather than 2 is just that it adds to the board meeting agendas. So that each time you're taking things up 3 times. So then your board meeting agendas get pretty packed with things. So that affects kind of the amount of workload you're getting in those board meetings.
It seems to me that one of the purposes, excuse me.
Oh, go ahead.
It seems to me that one of the purposes of this meeting was to just, look at our norms. And it seems like, to what Ashley was saying, we have the norm. It's just that we haven't been consistent on it. So this conversation that we're having right now is just reminding everyone. And on some of these, wouldn't it just be beneficial to say, oh yes, we understand this has been the established norm. We just need to remember it and make a note in the minutes or whatever that, okay, yep, we're reaffirming what Ashley presented, that, okay, this is the first reading, that, or so that we don't have to create another norm.
Bryce?
The superintendent mentioned, is 3, like the standard 3 readings. It triggered a thought for me, and it's something I've really appreciated that Alan has done during all the budget stuff. Is we're looking at it multiple times, but Alan is not going through the whole presentation again. So I think it was just a reintroduction. Hey, we talked about this at the last meeting here. Some key takeaways. Yeah. Maybe that wouldn't add as much to the content of the board meetings.
Maybe that's a good way to mention. I actually thought that the board did it twice, Ashley. That's why that it was on report, then it was on discussion, and then it could move to action. But I didn't realize there were 3. Is that, if that has been, I don't know.
It could be report to study session to discussion, potentially 2, or study session to report to discussion. That would basically be 3.
That's a reading, but not, yeah.
In theory too, in, let's say, their second reading, the presenter can ask the board, do you feel comfortable putting this on consent agenda for the next meeting?
Yeah.
And then it speeds things up too.
Also, just as a counterpoint, I think we actually have to talk about things a lot longer when we don't take the time to talk about them diligently. When we do things 3 times, we get questions answered over this length of time that decision-making takes, rather than trying to have a very long discussion in 1 or 2 meetings. I actually think it's counterintuitive to think talking about it less makes it happen faster, because people don't have their questions answered. It makes it take a lot longer, actually. In my experience, the things that end up are consented to because they have gone through the steps and procedures and everyone has their feedback heard.
Potentially less consternation in the process.
Excellent. I like all of that. And I know we're capturing this in the recording and in the minutes too. So let's move to item number 3. Ashley, I think this one was yours.
Yeah, I think that the norm that was suggested by leadership from USBA was that different boards keep meetings from their leadership meetings. So meaning when the board president and vice president meet with the superintendent and business administrator, those notes are kept. I think there's many times in my experience in this one term where I've been out of the loop on a topic until it appears in a meeting, and then I find out people have actually been talking about it. I don't think that's a great feeling, so I think getting those email updates is a reciprocal courtesy. Like when we're on committees, we give an update for our committee work. If I ever have a meeting with any staff member or visited a school, I give an update on that visit or meeting with a staff member to everybody. And I think the reciprocal courtesy when leadership has a meeting to send those notes, not just about these are the proposed agendas, but about other topics that are discussed is just reasonable.
Been a minute since I've been on the committee, and, you know, I have the last couple of meetings this year, being back on the finance committee. Because I don't know if I necessarily always see minutes from policy, other than just the updates that we get in the meeting. And so, Ashley, are you suggesting that we would want to adopt that similar standard for finance and policy as well?
No, because they meet only quarterly, and usually, like, if there is an item that needs to be emailed, you'll notice that I send an email that says, by the next meeting, we won't be able to talk about X, and then I give an update from finance and talk about Y and Z. Leadership meets weekly, so we can't wait between meetings to get, it's not the same. They're just, you know, and quarterly was probably the wrong word. How often does a policy? Five, so close to quarterly, and so that means that those things happen in such a space when usually an update can be given. We don't meet as a board every single week, so I can't get the leadership update every single week. So the reciprocal courtesy is about getting an update, not about the modality of the update.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, so our policy committee should be sending out updates before, you know, before the board meeting. Is that right? Or how should we do that?
That's a great question.
Don't you want to speak in your mic?
Said, that's a great question. I'm trying to think through it. I think maybe this is a little different than finance, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we do have each policy on the consent. So I don't know if it would be overkill to, I'm happy to do it if that's what we want, some sort of written update, but I think it is already on the agenda, so.
Maybe if it's maybe a contentious
Yeah,
or,
maybe,
or
I don't know, I'm open.
big change or something like that. Okay, use our judgment then. And then we would have to designate who is going to do that.
Right.
Yeah. Or do we have a committee chair?
No.
Oh, no?
The staff person?
Yeah,
Bring in a staff person to take minutes if you wanted to.
That when policy committee does review items, we usually do have an email from Jillian, who, what is, I'm going to say her job title incorrectly.
grandma and compliance?
Compliance officer, okay.
Oh,
So
okay.
She does actually. that's right.
apologies that I can't remember exactly what that job title is, but I will get updates via email, and that's kind of dropped off, actually. Like I used to get those where it would say what policies you were reviewing, and that made it possible for me to say, oh, Charlotte, I actually have some feedback about the policy involving the dress code, da, 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 and I could tell you before your committee meeting. But all those things are on a normative calendar that we all have access to, and you are correct that finance is different because we have certain things that happen on a cycle, but it's also costs that come up, you know, that are unique.
So you used to get those agendas ahead of, so
Yeah.
they went out to the whole board.
Yeah. I used to
You're
get.
talking, I'm gonna look for the last one while we're talking, because I thought everyone was on that one.
Well, and that would be helpful too, because with the stuff that was going on with G5, if, obviously, it's not a direct correlation, because I barely came on in January. But if I were here longer, being able to give feedback in advance and not causing board members to feel like I pulled the rug out from underneath them, then that might be more of a proactive way to do that versus a reactive way to handle things that we may not be 100% on the same page.
And if I may chime in, you are correct, the rest of the board was not included on the last one. But in the
But
past have
typically-
been.
In the past, I
Oh.
always.
Yeah, yeah, yep, you're,
From Jillian?
Finance?
Okay.
I know what you're talking.
I appreciate, Ashley, what you're saying about your meetings with like district personnel or teachers or what have you. I think that would be a benefit for all of the board members to participate in that too, because I've also been caught in various conversations where it's like, oh, well, so-and-so met with this principal or administrator, and what do you think of that, Board President Salazar? And it's like, I had no idea that happened, you know? And so I would I'd hope that not only for board leadership meetings, which I'm happy to do, and Brian and Bryce being both recent and past vice presidents, current and past vice presidents, would love your thoughts on that too. But I think it just streamlines communication for all realms, from all realms. Brian, any thoughts?
No, I think this is made
Good.
really clarify. I think we've clarified things here.
Perfect.
Did that just come up then as a new board norm that subcommittees send agendas to all board members?
And board leadership sends minutes from
It's
our meetings.
another, it's not on here, yeah.
What did you just say there, Nate?
And that board leadership sends our minutes from our
Minutes? Yeah.
leadership team meetings. Okay.
So when we're talking about minutes, if we were just giving bullet points, is that, what are your thoughts, Ashley, on minutes?
I think it just is a synonym for notes in this instance, because it's not an open public meeting that you're having, but these are the topics that were discussed. And then if I don't need to know more than what the topic was. If I know the topic was,
And ask
who knows?
questions.
I'll use dress code again, that there was like a big controversy about the dress code. Then I would be able to say, oh, hey, blah, 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 here's my feedback on that.
Okay, yeah, so it's more of like, this is what we talked about, and it's giving you like a heads up so that if you had additional insights or something like that.
Correct.
Charlotte?
I'm
It-
sorry, I didn't hear you, Ashley.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So do you also want us to make sure that the whole board is included on the email from Jillian when she says, we are having a policy committee meeting, this is what we will be discussing, you know, the agenda for the policy committee meeting?
I personally like getting that. I've
Okay,
enjoyed getting it.
We'll make sure that,
Cool.
so that'll be
Yeah,
another
that-
board norm.
Perfect. Item number 5. This one's come up quite a bit over my time here as well. Determine the timing for when the board meeting agenda is shared with board members prior to public release. Currently, we're doing our best to operate under a Thursday presentation of the agenda, ideally with all of the exhibits. We've talked in the past that if exhibits aren't ready, that the superintendent and Alan have the authority to say, sorry, we're kicking this from the agenda. But nonetheless, it seems like there's a desire to have more time before the Tuesday board meeting, and it's just trying to determine what that time frame is. And then also what's a realistic time frame from an administrative standpoint as well that we need to weigh in on or at least consider, so.
I know it's hard to get all of that together. I really do understand that and appreciate the work that goes into it. I would, and other board members have other thoughts, if we could even have it one more day, like Wednesday as opposed to Thursday, that would give me so much more time.
I think you should set the standard of what you want, and we have to meet it. So, I mean, there's always challenges with that, just.
Regardless of the day,
timing's
right?
hard, yeah. Depending on the day, but I think we should try and meet what you need as a board.
I mean, I want to be reasonable, and that's why I say the Wednesday as opposed to the Thursday, because I think one example was this last week for this meeting, that we got the agenda, and then the district offices closed both Friday and Monday, and so that was kind of hard.
It's similar because it goes right into weekend once we get them.
Yeah, so I'll just throw my thought out there, but the Wednesday before would be, I think, reasonable, but I'm open to discussion.
I think from a leadership standpoint too, it would be good for that extra day because trying to accommodate board member requests from Thursday to Friday is very challenging.
Yeah,
And-
Ashley crams them in before the weekend to give us some time.
Yeah.
Takes a lot, I know.
Now, I'd be grateful for one more day. Let's see how we do that, but yeah, just having a little bit more breathing room would be lovely.
How has it been done in the past? Do we know?
We're shooting for the Thursday before the board meeting.
I mean, like in the far past.
Oh, in the far
Past
past?
board
I think it's
iterations
typically
of the
always
board.
been the Thursday.
Thursday, even sometimes it's been Friday.
Yeah.
I think when the hard copies went out, those went out usually in the Friday packet.
Oh,
I remember those days. I think I might have been the last one to
In a
get
big
a hand
fat
delivered.
binder, all hard copy paper.
I remember my mom reading those.
Ah, I bet
Yeah,
you do.
I don't want to be a board member.
Well, folks like the Wednesday, give it a shot.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's gonna help a lot.
I just want to make sure I understood. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to understand. So you were saying that we're moving it up to Wednesday? Is that what we're thinking? Especially in light of like when we're closed on Fridays and things like that? Is that what?
Yeah, and Ashley had another point.
Well, I had a procedural question based on what you were asking, Brian, which is, we are saying Wednesday is a good goal, but at the outset of the conversation, we said the handbook committee would take this up. Are you anticipating that? Before our next meeting, the superintendent has to have items prepared in collaboration with others by Wednesday? Or is this just something that we've all said yes and the handbook committee will be discussing? Because that is actually a thing that is written down that we would have to change.
Right, and so I'm getting to that because we have to have clarity so that the handbook committee will know what they're tasked with doing. And
I'm
Superintendent?
fine jumping the gun of the handbook committee and working on our July 15th meeting is our
Test
next
it.
one. Yeah.
okay, but these things that we are agreeing to, there will be some that we have to take to the handbook committee and
For updates.
we'll be looking at that when we meet. We're not going to schedule a special meeting or, okay.
Okay. Item number 6, this is actually also a really good thing to be discussing too. Using our study sessions for topics on upcoming board meetings where we have cabinet presentations and discussion to guide our decisions. I know this is the practice of other boards too. And Superintendent, I think you shared with me just a minute ago about your experience with other superintendents and how they structure their board meetings at your USAA stuff this week. But I know it's a topic that Amanda and I talked about this morning with Charlotte as well, like what is our study session topic? What's the structure of our meeting? I think is what this one's getting to the heart of. And it could help with that first reading, second reading, third reading piece, and also allow for some more robust discussion that gets us the information that we need. So I'm not quite sure who put this one on. It might have been one that came from a few different board members, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think
If it was for me or Ashley.
it's kind of been
But-
talked about in general by a lot of
I
people.
think don't we all agree on that?
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think it partly played out, and if I remember right, in that some of the discussions, study sessions were pretty far displaced from when we needed to get to action. And so then that kind of conversation is a little bit rusty in minds. So having that even closer to when we're digging into, like, getting closer to needing the decisions versus a big, long, drawn-out thing. Because I don't know if it's normal, but there was a lot of things that's happened since January.
I think it is normal, I'm afraid.
So, like, making sure we're not forgetting things because they're so far removed from each other.
So my understanding of this is that the advantages are that you can have the conversation ahead of time, and your business meetings get shorter because you don't have the presentation and much of the questioning. It can go on in business meeting too, the questioning, but we wouldn't give presentations during business meeting. We would do those in study session. And still, we're trying to limit those for you so that it's more in the written material. But, so that's the advantage, like one district does. But then they increase the length of the study session, because then you're adding more. So my understanding of the way our district has done it, when I came in, it was study session is for things that the board wants to learn about. So it was kind of a learning session that was, oh, I want to understand what the national absenteeism problem is or something like that. Then we'd come present information on that. And then the board could then take up absenteeism later or something. But this then would be a change, because we'd be substituting kind of a learning session more for an actual discussion section, as I understand the difference. And correct me if you have other ideas on this, but that was my sense. So one district goes study session 4 to 6, and then takes a quick break, and then starts their business meeting later. Now theirs, they don't have short business meetings, but other districts do have very short business meetings where they time them and things like that to move things along. So that could be the structure, and I think it might be useful for, like, you guys want more genuine, robust discussion, and I think the study session like this lends itself to that some more.
I think it streamlines the actual process of discussing it and taking action. And I think about like our city council, they have a study session that starts in the morning sometimes, you know.
They do that before every meeting?
Yeah.
That's the other question,
work
is whether
session.
you
Work
just
session
do
is
it,
what they call
They call it a work session.
okay. So
They
then whether
post
you
all
do
day
it
long, right?
just once a month or twice a month? Like for each meeting you have a study session? And sometimes they're long and sometimes they're short and sometimes they're not at all? Or I don't know the best options for those.
It's probably situational depending on what topics are going on, right? So that's kind of an organic thing, but figuring out the, minimum of 3 readings, like how big is it? Is it something that's fairly new or there's a lot of working parts? So we go into a lengthy study session before, and then an update before we do.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's
Like something that's, I mean, if we took tonight's agenda for an example, we have on there the honors diploma, which you'll probably want to talk about a couple times, because that would be quite a change. The strategic plan would be quite a change. The focused graduation pathway, again, may be something you wouldn't put on study session because it's a pretty simple change. It's not a very complex change compared to maybe the others. So maybe you'd talk about some things that would be on the discussion items in board meeting, but not others. And agenda setting would have to help us figure out where things go.
And it could potentially be and correct me if I'm wrong in this approach, but this is upcoming topics, this is how we're going to lay it out on the agendas, unless it's in the discussion for first round for action, but another person's feeling like they need a lot more information, so we need to slow our roll and go into more in-depth analysis, kind of allowing a whole board opportunity to ascertain if we're there and ready for the decision, or if we need to actually slow down and have more opportunity to delve into it. Because I think that I presume there's an assumption that we only need so much information, and then we find out that an individual or individuals are seeking more information, so we are then, during a meeting, identifying that we have to slow down. Does that make sense? So kind of in advance, we're talking and saying, is the board ready for this? If they are, let's move it to discussion. Is the board needing more information? If so, do we do a study session or do we do it as a report? You guys are identifying the agenda, but then figuring out advance if that agenda structure is the right way, or if we need to rethink it based on the needs of any particular person, and understanding those topics to be able to get to a point of action in the timeline that is hoped for. Does that make sense?
I know, Ashley, you brought this up a lot, just the structure of the meeting, right? And does having a study session every meeting help us with this process? I think you've advocated that, yes, it would.
I think it would. I don't think it's always necessary. I think we have had, I'm trying to think how to say this. I think that I would be curious to know on average how many closed executive sessions are required as compared to how many we have held. And be curious about how much of what a board's typical study session time has actually, in our case, been taken up by closed executive session, because those two seem to, at times, trade off. And I would just be curious to zoom out, like, I don't know the answer to that. I don't have a way to analyze that information and input that into my computer. But I think saying we would do it every time is probably very rigid, but it's not unreasonable to consider doing it more frequently.
Advantage is that it would make the presentations in the public or the business meeting more of like, these are the general updates that we talked about in the study session, you know?
So you're suggesting, because this would be important to figure out too. So we come in, we present these strategic plan changes to you in a study session and have a conversation about it. Then in board meeting, what would you like from staff in that one? Do you have a sense of that?
That's where we would ask questions, right? And clarity, seek that.
So there's no, you'd ask more questions, because you would have had some discussion in the study session. But there wouldn't be, would there be another presentation or some sort of truncated
it would.
presentation? Or would you just say, here, the things are attached on the agenda, so if the public really wants to know, they can pull them
It
up?
would mirror what Bryce had mentioned, what he appreciates about Alan when he's presenting the budget. You know,
Which
But
is,
here are the highlights of what we previously discussed. This is what we discussed in study session today.
so to try and summarize study session for the public, or just
I
to
don't know if that's the
summarize
right,
the
but something
material?
similar.
Because I mean, Brian, were you trying to speak on this topic?
No, I've just been listening.
Okay.
to-
But again, it's in the interest of time, I think we have a general idea of what we're talking about. I think enough for some brainstorming to take place in handbook, because there's some important other things that we got to get to here. Do you mind if I move us along, Dr. Grant? Okay. Item number 7, the 3 to agree. This would definitely require some changes to our handbook and our policy. As I understood, the 3 to agree is that it would take a board member to raise a requested item for the agenda, and they would need essentially 2 seconds for it to appear on the agenda. Unless I misread that from our training that we had with Terry and Richard and the other guy, I forgot his name, I'm sorry. But nonetheless,
Mark.
Mark Clement.
Clemens.
But that's how I understood the 3 to agree.
I understood it a little bit differently.
Okay.
I heard that Mark was suggesting it was before an item was brought to the superintendent
Okay.
to discuss, rather than it being about what goes on the
I think
agenda.
I heard that as
With that in mind, I don't think it's necessarily unreasonable for the handbook committee to discuss if it's worth it to have 2 seconds. I mean, in any situation where I've requested something or been the second to someone, I find it hard to believe there would not be a third board member who would support the request of that person, or, you know, or have their own request and understand they would like some mutual support for that. So I'm not opposed to it, but I heard him saying we needed 3 to agree to request, like, to discuss that with, say, the superintendent or whatever.
Yeah, I think I do remember hearing it that way, and I think in a previous era of the board had heard the 3 to agree, meaning the agenda piece. Do you want handbook committee to take up both of those instances? Okay.
You've got to speak more into the mic, Nate.
Sorry, Brian. We're gonna have
No, that's,
we're gonna have handbook committee take on both 3 to agree for proposing agenda items and for requests to the superintendent, and I think we throw Alan into that mix as well.
okay. So
Items-
these things will come to the handbook committee.
Correct. In the interest of time, you can disagree, but I think item number 8 we cover in item number 5. Item number 9 we cover in item number 4. Cool. Number 10, board member absences from meetings. Can't remember who brought this one up.
The idea was to create a norm for responding to this.
Well, and I think the tricky part, I think it was a general concern. And I think the tricky part is what can be done, given we're elected positions, and we can't unelect ourselves or each other.
I unelect you.
We could resign.
So,
Okay.
you know, yes, there's an
So
expected.
what is legal, what is legally allowed?
Yeah.
And, yeah, and maybe because of time, maybe that's gonna have to be a continued conversation. But it goes back to that engagement and probably dealt with through the evaluation criteria.
Cool. Well, let's,
Can I say just one quick
Please.
thing? And I don't want to have
okay.
further conversation after I say what I say. But I think when we do have this conversation on item 10, it's about a respect thing. It's not necessarily about number of times you miss or things of that nature. I think it's about a respect to each other and our constituents.
that's fair.
That's,
I think that that's key, but I think that also, and we have, and I know that we don't have time to talk about it in its entirety. It's a respect, but it's also a responsibility that you have to the constituents who voted for you. And the way that I look at it, I don't know how the rest of you look at it, but you're responsible for being at those board meetings to represent their concerns. And when you're not there, you're not fulfilling your duty to those constituents. So it seems to me that there does need to be some sort of a conversation on how you encourage board members to fulfill their duties, because they are being paid.
yeah, Brian, I was just going to say that I agree with you.
Cool. And I think having district's legal counsel weigh in on those nuances is important as well.
And I believe the handbook actually talks a little bit about what Brian was saying as well, gives a little bit of guidance on that as well, just FYI.
Yeah, I mean, we're not being paid a lot, but certainly not paid a lot, but I mean, we are, and we need to be respectful of that.
I agree. Item number 11, I feel, this is about the calendar and annual agenda setting, annual calendar and agenda setting. Brian and I had heard this recommendation from Ashley earlier this year, and I know that Dr. Grant and Alan have produced some kind of a calendar that I think is ready to share with the board in some ways.
I was just thinking, I'm not sure that cabinet has gone
Weighed in
through
on
this
it?
as well as I want them to.
Okay.
There's a couple things I'm seeing that are, because sometimes we just copy old calendars to keep, because some things are so, some things are annual. But, so the idea on this, one thing I want to ask about this, if we have this working calendar, is just who has editing rights? Because I'm a little worried about version control and what gets on the calendar. And it would seem that that maybe the board makes suggestions for things to put on the calendar to board leadership.
I don't even know if it was that, Grant,
Is
just in
that-
the interest of time. I think it was more about things that were statutorily and annually
Is it more just like a static
needing review
calendar?
and approval.
Yeah, things that we know we have to do so that then we don't discover, and this goes back to the other part of this request, was just schedule out 3 meetings ahead. Because then what happens is when one meeting becomes too full, you still have 2 additional, you know what I mean? Things can get moved around. And to go back to your point about editing, I would never request to be able to edit the calendar or that every board member could edit the calendar. What I think used to happen in the days of the paper delivery is also that when board leadership did make changes based on conversations, of course, with the whole board, that then the calendar is revised. It is agreed upon that it's revised and it was printed. Do you know what I'm saying? And now there is no new printing that needs to take place. But it's not about being able to edit at will. It's about knowing the fixed items so that other movable items get effectively moved rather than ineffectively added
Oh, I see.
all at once in what becomes emergent.
We've been using the running table, the one that we've captured things, and when we have agenda settings, sometimes we'll print it out in that form, that it's just a table. But you're thinking of something that's more static, almost, of, these are the annual things we have to get done every year, and this is when we typically do them. Okay.
And then
So
when
I get
something happens in a
those.
meeting, you say, in this meeting, the board said this, 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 and this. And you would put that little Post-it on that part of the, like, they said they would discuss this again in 2 months. Okay, there it is.
And it's kind of, I feel like, also plays into what we were talking about this morning at the agenda setting meeting, is when we are, and I think it's kind of what you were talking about just then, is we have a board meeting, we have a topic we need to circle back to, if you've got a working planner, you are, identify which month it needs to fall in and put that in there as a placeholder to make sure that we are following up to that important
It's for
topic versus it getting
follow-through,
lost.
right? For follow-through,
Yeah,
make sure,
'cause-
and make sure we're meeting the deadlines that we need.
Agreed.
Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong too, but I think structural board meeting efficiencies was kind of covered in number 6, unless there was something else that we wanted to really capture there.
I think the only suggestions that I've made in the past are things that would make that other boards do, which is when we all share positive news, that's like fine and lovely to share positive news. But other boards typically have that section as like committee reports or committee updates, and they alternate who shares their positive news. Because I'm able to say, I was so happy to go to the Raptor ride with Bryce because it wasn't rained out. Just kidding. Every time I've tried to do it, it's been rained out. And it doesn't really matter if I say that in May or June. It just matters that I share that that occurred. And when we rotate, it's more efficient. I also think the state board does a lot of things that are, in the history of this district board, it's kind of oscillated between starting with a great celebration that takes a long time or being like, we're not celebrating because this takes too long and we're getting down to business. And there's actually an in-between place where, you know, 2 people used to go take a picture under the logo while everybody else was starting to vote on the consent agenda or begin the discussion. Or the pictures happened before the meeting started. Silly things like that don't really, they're not of great consequence, but they end up taking about, 30 to 40 minutes if we don't manage them efficiently.
Well, this has been helpful. We are out of time. The last thing I wanted to pass out, and thank you for this, we'll follow up in board handbook. Amanda, I'm sorry I didn't quite make it to you, but if you would take one and pass it down. So this is just he doesn't yet, but I'll make sure that he gets one.
Okay.
So Brian, listen carefully, but this is our board evaluation timeline. Tonight, we will have our first review of the USBA criteria on July 15th. Based on the conversation tonight, I know folks want to make some suggestions to that. We'll have our final and ideally adopt our evaluation criteria. Depending on how many changes we feel like we need to make and are comfortable with as a board, it depends on, it kind of increases or decreases the time for Richard to enter it into the evaluation tool and get it to us. So he's pretty confident that regardless of how many changes we make, he's like, Nate, if you just redeveloped a whole new list of criteria, it's probably gonna take me like 5 days. But if it's just a couple of different changes, it's really easy. So that's why I kind of have a 1920 that will receive the evaluation tool to fill out independently, due by July 29th. He said that date can also be moved back if we need to. But nonetheless, he is also prepared to come join us on August 2nd to present those results. Sound
Okay,
good?
so he's ready to come on, or he's willing to come on August the 2nd, but we're looking at it tonight, and then the 15th, and then what did you say, the 20th?
Yeah, so either July 19th or 20th, we should
Mhm.
receive the evaluation tool from Richard to complete it by July 29th.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
cool. Well, I think that ends our study session. Let's go get ready for closed session. I think there should be food ready for us in the kitchen area. Oh, and we do need a motion to go into closed session.
I move that we go into.
Before you
I
do
have
that,
to read it?
Charlotte, we need to have very specific.
Yeah, language.
So it would be
Character and
character competence and contract negotiations.
Legal updates.
Legal updates is at the end.
Well,
I believe it's typically on the agenda, right?
Charlotte, just
don't know. Not
contract negotiations and
Yes.
character and competence.
Yeah. I move that we move into closed session to discuss character of an individual or
Yeah.
Character
competence, character and competency of an individual or,
and contract.
and contracts.
I'm not-
Negotiations, I second.
I just want to say, I'm not sure that we did that correctly. So
Okay,
I'd offer a substitute that the board would enter a closed session for any of the permissible purposes outlined in Utah Code 524205.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Let's do, any discussion? Seeing none, we'll start with Amanda and just work our way around the table.
Amanda Longwell, yes.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Charlotte Fife Jefferson, yes?
Brian?
Brian Jensen, yes.
All right, we are in closed session and we'll return for 6 PM public meeting.
Do we have to vote on the underlying motion? And just all in favor, yes or no?
Oh.
Because there was another motion and second on the table.
Thank you.
I retract my motion.
Yeah, I mean, I like that approach.